Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, Washington has confirmed that the US tariffs on Chinese goods have surged to 145% after the latest hike, while China is raising tariffs on US imports to 125%. Economic ministers from ASEAN members have gathered in Kuala Lumpur to strengthen economic ties. And Gabon will hold a presidential election on the weekend, the first one since a military coup in the African nation in 2023. We begin in North America. Washington has confirmed that the US tariffs on Chinese goods have surged to 145% after the latest hike. US stocks ended lower on Thursday, resuming their free fall after posting significant gains one day earlier. Investors are growing increasingly anxious over trade tensions between China and the US. Nick Harper has more from Washington, D.C.
This clarification from the White House actually causing more confusion. 145%, we're told, is the actual figure of tariffs being placed on China. The White House releasing this initially to CNBC, but also to some other US networks since then, saying that the latest round of tariffs, the 125% figure, is actually on top of an additional 20% that was due to fentanyl-related tariffs that were placed on China earlier this year. So 20% plus 125%, and the White House says we get to that figure of 145%. The problem is that this clarification is certainly causing problems for Wall Street. Markets do not like to be surprised, and the White House, with this new figure, is surprising Wall Street. So we're seeing markets dropping even further off the back of this news. The Dow Jones was down 4.3%, the S&P down 5.1%, and the Nasdaq down almost 6%, 5.9%. So we saw an incredible rally from Wall Street, the third best finish since the end of World War II in 1945. That was all taking place on Wednesday. What a difference a day makes. We've had these new figures from the White House, and that is causing a lot of problems. Remember, Donald Trump says that he would like to have a meeting with President Xi Jinping of China. This extra news now coming out might make it even harder for both sides to get around negotiating table. Up until now, Beijing has made it very clear that they are remaining firm, waiting this one out, and certainly not in a rush to get to the table to speak about some sort of deal with the US president.
That was Nick Harper in Washington. China says it is raising tariffs on US imports from 84 to 125%, matching the level announced by the Trump administration this week. The State Council Customs Tariff Commission also says it will not make further responses to any future increases in US levies on China, as US exports already have no market acceptability in China under the current tariff rates. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry said the United States should stop imposing pressure if it wants to resolve the issues through dialogue. Spokesperson Lin Jian said China does not want this fight, but will not back down.
Tariff and trade wars have no winner. China does not want to fight these wars, but is not scared of them. If the U.S. truly wants to settle the issue through dialogue and negotiation, it should stop exerting maximum pressure and reckless actions, which China will never accept. Any dialogue must be based on equality, respect, and mutual benefit. If the U.S. is determined to fight a tariff and trade war, China's response will continue to the end.
China also announced restrictions on some U.S. entities in an attempt to protect its interests. Authorities have pledged support for domestic companies facing the high tariffs. Staying in Asia, economic ministers from ASEAN members have met in Kuala Lumpur to strengthen economic ties. They've also reaffirmed support for the rules-based multilateral trading system. Rian Mauser has more from the Malaysian capital.
It couldn't have anticipated that its chairmanship of ASEAN for 2025 would get off to such a tumultuous start. 4 ASEAN countries faced US tariffs of between 44 and 49%. Host Malaysia was lower at 24%. But with America, its #1 export market last year, still a major worry. Ahead of Thursday's meetings, ASEAN's economic ministers and central bank heads woke with relief to news that the tariffs were being suspended for 90 days.
Of course, I would say, alhamdulillah, at least for now, there's a temporary reprieve. But at the same time, there is a very strong, hardened position vis-à-vis China, which is also a problem to us.
While the finance ministers met in person, ASEAN trade ministers held a virtual meeting. The ministers unanimously rejected the basis for the US calculations of the tariffs, calling them regressive and damaging to the global trading order. They also rejected retaliation, opting for engagement instead.
ASEAN reaffirms its continued commitment to open, inclusive and rule-based multilateral trading systems and to ASEAN's economic integration. We stand ready to work constructively with all partners, including the United States.
If anything, US protectionism is encouraging ASEAN to strengthen economic ties with the bloc's major partners, including China, and to maximize the benefits of pacts like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. ASEAN will be counting on Southeast and East Asian free trade and economic integration to help it endure whatever the US might throw at it.
That was Rian Mauser in Malaysia. Turning to Europe, the European Union has suspended its retaliatory tariffs after US President Donald Trump announced a 90-day pause on his sweeping taxes. European Commission spokesperson Olaf Gill says the bloc will use this period to explore solutions.
We want to negotiate. We want to talk. We appreciate that you have brought this pause on so-called reciprocal tariffs, and we in turn are now pausing our proposed countermeasures in order that we have the maximum space to consult with our member states, consult with our industry and negotiate with the US. We're ready to make deals. Let's talk.
Meanwhile, EU countries are finding ways to diversify their economy and expand cooperation with other partners. Pablo Gutierrez reports from Brussels.
The EU for now is choosing the path of negotiation over confrontation. The Commission President has responded in kind to President Trump's 90-day suspension of planned tariffs. She said it's a positive step toward global economic stability. The EU's measures that are on hold right now are worth about $24 billion. The EU had planned to roll them out in 3 waves starting next week on April 15. Now, as all of this unfolds, some countries are already taking steps to protect their economies. Portugal's government just announced loans worth over $11 billion to help its economy sustain the impact of the Trump tariffs. Approximately half of those funds will be destined to help companies that are affected by all of this. Prime Minister from Spain, Pedro Sanchez, he's in China now, and he is seeking to deepen those trade ties with Beijing. Sanchez is the first leader to visit after the tariff war began. China has invested billions of dollars in Spanish EV industry in recent years. So for now, EU countries are looking for economic proximity to China. Some of them are, and for Brussels, strengthening business ties is also essential because trade between both parties is worth around $783 billion.
That was Pablo Gutierrez on the EU weighing its trade options. In the Middle East, the United Nations is urging the resumption of humanitarian aid into Gaza. UN agencies warn the daily Israeli attacks are worsening the already dire humanitarian situation in the Strip, which is facing a lack of food supplies. Officials say over 60,000 local children are suffering from malnutrition. Rami Amagari has more.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres again this week emphasized on the need for the flow of humanitarian aid supplies into Gaza. The UN's chief also called for ensuring safety of all the humanitarian aid workers working under the dangerous conflict here in the Gaza Strip. This comes against the backdrop of shortage of food items, essential food items, including flour, sugar and cooking oil, all the goods available in the territory are becoming increasingly unaffordable. Meanwhile, majority of the households here have resorted to wood fires instead of gas due to the shortage of the cooking gas here in the territory. Also, amid the hardship, the Israeli army continues its airstrikes and bombardments and all over the Gaza Strip after the Israeli army had broken a 2-month ceasefire in early March, including the cutting off of those aid supplies. Health officials here in the territory say that more than 1,300 Palestinians have been killed since then, amidst very shortage of medical supplies.
That was Rami Almagare reporting. Finally, in Africa, a presidential election will be held in Gabon on the weekend, the first one since a military coup in 2023. A group of senior military officers took over the government, with leader Brice Oligui Nguema becoming the country's interim leader. But former Prime Minister Alan Cloud Billy Baita says the military leader should resign his position in the army to be a viable candidate. Joy Kiruki-Juma has more.
Gabon is set to hold a presidential election on Saturday, the first since a 2023 coup ended the Bongo family's 56-year dynasty. The coup's leader and transitional president, Brice Oligui Nguema, initially promised to hand back power to civilians. But he's putting his name forward, as November's new constitution allows him to do so. It's a decision which hasn't gone down well with other candidates.
And someone who wants to run the state must resign from the army, which he has not done. So today, he is completely at odds with all of his commitments. We will put an end to this. We will ensure that Gabonese democracy is revived, that it is truly alive.
Nguema's main challenger is Ali Bongo's former Prime Minister, Alain Claude Biliba Nze. Nze created his own movement, Together for Gabon, in an effort to distance himself from the Bongo regime. He says he's concerned about the uneven playing field in the run-up to Saturday's poll.
Never before has an election been so tightly controlled. The candidate currently in charge of the transition is campaigning using state resources. It's a scandal. It has never happened like this before.
Voters are, however, divided about their choice for president.
The future president of the state depends on us, depends on our voice, on what we will choose and what we will decide.
I would prefer and wish that my children identify with someone courageous, someone intelligent, like Mr. Alain Claude Biliba Nze.
At least 8 candidates are vying for the top seat. Political analyst tip Nguema for the win, given his advantages as both the incumbent and his popularity as the architect of the Bongo dynasty's downfall.
That was Joy Kiruki-Juma reporting. Now recapping the headlines, Washington has confirmed that the US tariffs on Chinese goods have surged to 145% after the latest hike, while China is raising tariffs on US imports to 125%. Economic ministers from ASEAN members have gathered in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to strengthen economic ties. And Gabon will hold a presidential election on the weekend, the first one since a military coup in the African nation in 2023. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.